This is John Bailey, the epic voice of Honest Trailers, and you're listening to the Five-ish Fangirls podcast. It's a Fangirls podcast with five-ish people. The tangents and squee will continue. Squee.
The tangents this week continue all the way to episode 269 of the Five-ish Fangirls podcast. Truly, for some men, nothing is written unless they write it. Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Five-ish Fangirls podcast. So glad you could join us. Let's start off like I do every week with the virtual table and see who's joined us this week.
This is Brittany in Bethlehem.
This is Chrissy in Salt Lake City.
This is Holly from Wisconsin.
This is Rachel in Indianapolis, Indiana. Hello, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
We're all being locked in. Yes, and Chauncey's here too.
Yep.
Hey, and we're all practicing our social distancing.
Yes.
Or as I've always called it, maintaining personal boundaries.
Yes.
Yes.
Or as I've called it, being an introvert.
I know. I'm like, I hear this word social distancing that has seemingly come out of this crisis, and I'm just like, you mean if I can kick you, you're too close? That's always how I've operated.
Yeah.
It's like
Exactly.
I don't need a new buzzword for it. Come on.
Like, this is called life.
Respect.
I need to stay home and, like, read all the books that have been piling up and watching all those shows I've been meaning to get to. I was like, I've been training for this for
I think I'm going to probably have to go to the
I'm excited for
jiu-jitsu gym
this.
and cover myself. I go to jiu-jitsu here in town, and it's like, now with all this, I think I might have to cover myself in saran wrap and train like that.
and make for some interesting technique.
Yeah.
Oh my. So anyway, yeah, we're gonna skip the news this week because a lot of the news is due
Everything's
to what's
canceled.
happening at the moment, and
Yeah.
that's going to be its own show in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
We'll get to that next week when everything is still closed, so it won't matter.
Just be safe, be smart, and wash your hands.
Yes.
That's
Exactly.
what it boils down to. You don't need to hear it a gazillion times.
Yeah.
Not that you haven't already.
Yeah. You ever seen whether 2 episodes of Parks and Recreation where they're dealing with the flu season? Just everything that they're doing, just do the opposite and you'll be fine.
Not that it's not serious. I'm
Yeah.
not trying to make light of a situation. I'm just trying to find the
Definitely
humor in it because we could definitely use a distraction and some humor.
Yep.
Because I'm sick of feeling like there's nothing good in the world, which is not true
Yeah.
entirely.
I'm not sure if this topic is really going to do any of that, but
We'll have fun anyway.
yeah, we're finally getting around to serving our comeuppance from this year's Oscars debacle contest against.
We
the
didn't
guys
lose
from-
that bad.
Bad.
Yeah.
No.
Well, points wise, no, we did not lose that bad. Our punishment, on the other hand, though, I don't think this punishment fits the cry. At least in my humble opinion. So, especially considering how easy they got last year.
True.
Yeah. So we obviously, as we've discussed, we had our annual Oscar competition against the guys from Spark Madness. We lost, not by a whole lot, but we still lost. A loss is a loss. We, at the time when we recorded, we did not know what our punishment was going to be. So we're going to wait till they came and we're like, okay, here's your punishment. And actually their first suggested movie was not appropriate for our listeners. So
Yep.
That got the
Seen it.
kibosh.
It's good, but yeah.
Yeah. So we put the kibosh on that real quick. So, so their plan B was Lawrence of Arabia.
I deem him one of the greatest beings alive in our time. We shall never see his like again. His name will live in history. It will live in the annals of war. It will live in the legends of Arabia.
Who is he? Betu. Tavas!
What is your name?
My name is for my friends. None of my friends is a murderer. Come on, men!
For over a quarter of a century, controversy has raged around the name of T.E. Lawrence. No man of our time has drawn upon himself so much praise and so much criticism. Lawrence of Arabia, the man torn between two civilizations. Lawrence of Arabia, filmed against a canvas of awesome magnificence.
Lieutenant Lawrence is not your military advisor.
But I would like to hear his opinion.
Damn it, Lawrence, who do you take your orders from?
From Lord Faisal, in Faisal's tent.
Hailing the birth of a new star, Peter O'Toole as Lawrence of Arabia. What was he really like, this controversial figure who became a legend in his own lifetime?
He was the most extraordinary man I ever knew.
He was a very great man. He was a poet, a scholar, and a mighty warrior. He was also the most shameless exhibitionist since Barnum and Bailey.
What, in your opinion, do these people hope to gain from this war?
They hope to gain their freedom.
There's one born every minute.
They're going to get it, Mr. Bentley. I'm going to give it to them.
Lawrence and Arabia. Together, they made history. Now, a gathering of international stars unfolds the story. Alec Guinness as Prince Faisal.
The English have a great hunger for desolate places. I fear they hunger for Arabia.
Anthony Quinn as Auda Abu Tayi.
I carried 23 great wounds, all got in battle. 75 men have I killed with my own hands in battle. I scatter, I burn my enemies' tents. I take away their flocks and herds. The Turks pay me a golden treasure, yet I am poor. Because I am a river to my people.
Jack Hawkins as General Allenby.
I believe your name will be a household word when you would have to go to the War Museum to find who Allenby was. You're the most extraordinary man I ever met.
Leave me alone.
What?
Leave me alone.
Jose Ferrer as the Turkish Bey.
Your skin is very fair.
Also starring Anthony Quayle, Claude Rains, Arthur Kennedy, with Omar Sharif as Ali, and Peter O'Toole as Lawrence.
So yeah,
I'm gonna have to send the Spark of Madness an invoice for all my time I invested in such a.
Yeah, really.
Well, I will say this, because I watched it in about 2 sittings because I had a baby on my lap that I didn't want to move because she was asleep. So I'm like, well, I will just set up the DVD player on my laptop and sit here and watch it. And the time actually went faster than I thought it would, personally. And
yeah. Okay, so let's start this off. So before getting this assigned to us, well, not show hands because nobody can see, but had anyone seen this movie before?
No.
No.
Okay, so we all went into this never seeing it. How many of us had at least a vague idea of what it was about?
A bit.
A little bit. It's one of those. It's one of those, old classic movies that you're like, if you're a real film buff, you've probably seen at least once. If you're an aspiring film buff, you probably like, oh, I'm going to get around to that someday. Maybe you looked it up while you were in a film class in college, but if you weren't assigned to watch it, you didn't.
Or if
so that's
liked,
kind of where I was coming from.
Yeah, or if you liked Alec Guinness from Star Wars and Obi-Wan Kenobi, you did a look. Oh, okay, Bridge Over River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia. Okay.
Yeah,
Rainy day.
I approached this movie like I approached all films I had to watch in like film studies class, where it was like, it's good for me, like oatmeal, but like it's just not something I enjoy that much.
Well, I will say this for it, because I like kind of historical drama type of stuff. I actually kind of enjoy these old-timey sort of classic films when I get around to watching them. So I kind of enjoyed it. If you've ever seen Muppet Treasure Island, and they're tormenting Gonzo for the location of the map, well, tormenting him, and Gonzo's like enjoying it, and then they're stretching him out, and he's saying, I could play in the NBA, and the Polly Lobster goes, this is no good, he likes it, like it's a bad thing. I feel like if I were to talk the Spark of Madness, those guys would be Polly Lobster. They'd be the ones going, dang it, she likes it, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of did. I'm like, this is punishment?
Yeah.
It has a good score. I will give it.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the cinematography is good. It's just like a lot of sand.
And it is dang pretty to look at, too.
Yes.
Not
It
just
is a beautiful film.
Yeah. Not just the scenery. Peter O'Toole he's a little too pretty for my taste, but I can appreciate.
We'll get into the casting here in a little bit.
But those are kind of my initial thoughts. Is it's pretty to look at, and I kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah, I liked it for the most part. For me, though, it's just like there was times where they just kept on like a certain scene way too long for like my opinion. Like okay, we get what's going on. Maybe cut it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it actually was cut for its original theatrical release because the studio made him cut it down to, I can't remember what the length was.
Yeah.
So the versions that are on the DVDs now, those are the director's cut. So yeah, you're probably onto something there, Britt.
Yeah, there's 4 different run times depending on which cut you watch. At the premiere, it was 222 minutes. And then when they started showing it in theaters after the premiere, they cut 20 minutes out of it, so it became 202 minutes.
Oh boy.
They re-released it in 1970, and it was 187 minutes, so that's quite a bit that was cut.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it got restored in the late 80s, the restoration cut was 228 minutes. So,
dang.
Yep. But yeah, backtracking just a little for those listening that are completely lost. Like, what the heck are they talking about? 228 minutes. What the crap is this?
Like 4 hours almost?
Yes, it already is almost 4 hours. That's the thing. But Lawrence of Arabia is a British historical epic kind of biopic movie, but not that historically accurate, but we'll get into that. But it is supposed to be biographical, based on the story of T.E. Lawrence, who was an English officer who, during the same time frame as World War I, goes to the Arabia, and leads a essentially ragtag group of Arab tribes against the Turks of the Ottoman Empire. So, and this is T.E. Lawrence. He was a real person. He was born in England, in Wales, actually, in 1888, and he, from a young age, he had a great fascination with archaeology and Middle Eastern history, and the Arabic, all that, learning the Quran, and learning about their culture and all sorts of things. So when he gets pulled into serve in the early part of World War I, they realized that since he knew that area really, really well, that he would be a good asset. Because what's going on at this point is we're fully into World War I. The Germans have allied themselves with the Turks of the Ottoman Empire. And, we've got trench warfare going on in France and that sort of thing. And the English and the French have allied together on the opposite side. And while most of the, what we recognize as the major fighting of World War I is happening in, in France and places like that, there is a battle for strategic placement in the Middle East because of things like the Suez Canal, and some other strategic locations. So when the Germans team up with the Turks, the British realize this is bad and need to figure out a way to get a leg up strategy-wise. So the T.E. Lawrence is sent to assess the situation and ends up weaseling his way into leading this group of Arabs, because at this point in that part of the world, there's not an Arab state. They don't have their own country. It's just a bunch of individual tribes that have their own leaders and sometimes war with each other. Sometimes they're friends with each other. But Lawrence, supposedly with his cunning and charisma, is able to convince them to join together, and he leads them to really inconvenience the Turks more than anything, by taking a somewhat strategic location and then going around blowing up the railroad tracks so that they struggle to get supplies to their troops and stuff. And then eventually they do take Damascus. That is a real thing. But they don't keep Damascus for very long because they cannot, the Arab tribes cannot get along. So it ends up going to the hands of the British and the French. So that's the Cliff Notes version of why Lawrence kind of became famous, because he was this one Brit in the middle of all of these Arabs kind of leading the way. This, white guy savior thing, and this, they used him for, report in the newspapers and stuff for the Americans and other places where they're like, look, one of us, a white guy, doing good for our side of the war. It kind of made him a household name.
Yeah.
Whether he wanted to or not.
So, as far as, the genre of Lawrence of Arabia, it's biographical, it's historical fiction, we'll call it, in a way. It's also a war movie, which, you think war movie, you kind of, it doesn't have the look of a war movie. Let's say that, but it definitely is, because, when they're going and blowing up the railroad tracks and doing their little guerrilla warfare tactics. It's like, as I'm sitting there going like, wow, when I'm watching it, like, I did not know that this was, like, I don't want to compare it to Saving Private Ryan, but it was the only thing that popped into my head while I was watching that scene, which is ridiculous. But there it is. Because that's the one I think of when I think of war movies, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
it's like,
I think coming from a perspective of, it's not a period of history I'm very familiar with, and it's not. Well, also because before I started watching it, I was reading a few like Wikipedia articles, TV tropes, just those kind of things, just to kind of familiarize myself with the movie. And when they said things like, it inspired future movies like Indiana Jones, like Steven Spielberg's a huge fan of this movie.
Oh yeah.
And The Mummy is one that because that's one of my favorite movies is The Mummy, took a lot of inspiration as far as like the setting, the music. So I can kind of appreciate it on that level of, hey, here are some things that I recognize from other movies that I like. So I can see where the inspiration comes from and why those tropes show up. It's because of a movie like Lawrence of Arabia, because that was such a huge epic, made a big mark on the movie industry. It's like, well, these directors, writers, composers took cues from this film. So I'm like, I can appreciate it on that level of, it made a huge impact on movies as an art form.
Oh yeah, I mean the entire time I'm watching it, like I can see like, oh, I can see how this influenced that movie, or how the music, obviously influenced that movie, and like, yeah, this is one of Steven Spielberg's like absolute favorite movies of all time. He actually worked on the restoration team, in the 80s for this, and I found a video on YouTube. I'll put link in the show notes, of him talking about how he worked on the restoration, and then they showed it to David Lean, who directed it. And instead of just watching the movie, he essentially got a one-on-one like director commentary track.
Yeah, that
sitting there with Lean telling him like everything about this movie while sitting there watching the restored version of it.
I was involved in the restoration of Lawrence, and I remember the honor of sitting next to David the first time we showed him his own film. And he watched it for the first time in a long time with us, all finished, brand new answer print on the available printing stock that was much better than the available printing stock he had in the 60s. But instead of being quiet and watching the picture for his own pleasure, he wanted to talk me through every single scene. So I got a kind of, what we have on our DVDs today, where you've got the director talking about his film while you watch the picture. You got the narration on one track. It was exactly the experience I had, except it was live. And David Lean is next to me, giving me all the details of how every single sequence was shot, where it was shot, what Peter O'Toole was like that morning. That was a good morning for Peter, a bad morning for Peter, what it was like working with Omar Sharif, what it was like working with Alec Guinness again. I mean, David was narrating the backstage how I made Lawrence of Arabia while we were watching together Lawrence of Arabia restored. It was an amazing couple of hours for me.
Yeah, that interview was on the DVD set I got. So I was like, I didn't watch all the special features, but I watched some of them. That was one of them I watched. And I was like, that would be so cool to sit there, whatever, pick a movie, Lord of the Rings, because it's huge and long and epic and whatever. And even though we've all probably seen or listen to the director's commentary on those, if you're sitting next to Peter Jackson and he's telling you stories about the movie, about filming the movie while you're watching it, you'd be like, okay, I'm going to ignore the movie and just listen to you.
Yeah.
I kind of figured that would
Definitely.
be. That's probably what the Spielberg was going through when he was
Yeah.
sitting there with David Lean.
Yeah. Well, and what's crazy is, is as much as I did not enjoy this movie, and it's not because it's not a good movie, it's just I think the difference between something like this and versus like Saving Private Ryan, or even though it's something historically I didn't know a lot about, kind of like when we were talking Chernobyl on our last episode, it wasn't something I knew a lot about, but Chernobyl, it made you care about the people. And this, there's the people, for as much screen time as they have, they don't give you enough to really give a crap.
I think maybe
about
go
except
ahead.
for maybe the orphans, the two orphans that Lawrence takes on as his his little servant boys. But they just they spend so much time just these long shots of people riding on camels and shots of sand dunes and people riding on camels. And it's like, if you could cut a lot of that out and then make like a beautiful like advertisement for come visit Egypt, come visit this part of the world. Look how beautiful it is. Ride a camel, get the entire desert experience, and it would be good for that. But it's like you really could have spent more time focusing on Lawrence and the other people around him and make us care a bit more about who these people are and what happens to them and the conflict that happens between these people. That after a while, I'm just like, I don't care anymore. I'm bored.
And I think a lot of that is down to the fact that the characters, a lot of the characters, except for even Lawrence, they're not really. They're just kind of there to move the plot along, because it feels like, which, and I kind of have to look at it as, this was the time period in which it was made, and they weren't quite as focused on, telling a focusing on the characters so much as they were telling, or like, this is a story we want to tell. If we get it right, fine, but really we want to, make this big, epic, sweeping, all the adjectives that you think of, or that people talk about when they talk about this movie. So it's like their focus is a little bit different, comparing it to, like we said, Chernobyl. It's a little, that one is they're focused on the people and how the events played out and how it affected people. Whereas this one, they're like, we're just going to tell you what happened, and we'll get it as true as we care to. And you're going to be entertained for these, 4 hours or however long this is. So it's a historical. It's told in a different way than maybe we're used to. I mean, this movie is 50 years old, and you're right, Rachel. The characters, some of them I'm like, okay, I can't remember your name. When I was sitting down after I'd watched it to think about what my thoughts were, I'm like, I can't, that character, his sidekick buddy. Oh, there's the guy that Alec Guinness plays. Like, I don't know, or the reporter that's following him around, or the two boys that are helping him out. Yeah, I don't remember anyone's name except for Lawrence because his name's in the title. And so yeah, I don't remember the characters' names. I just am kind of like, I'm just sitting here and enjoying it's more of like an experience rather than something to get really immersive. If I were to watch it again, maybe I'd pay more attention to who the characters are. But I don't know that I want to spend that amount of time. I mean, I'm sitting here, I've got the Lord of the Rings DVD sitting on my shelf. I've been meaning to rewatch forever. I think I'd rather spend my time with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I didn't necessarily like enjoy it, but it certainly was a good feeling of like an old timey, like big Panavision cinematic thing. The most fascinating thing I found about the whole movie is just the unique arc of Lawrence himself. If there's anything to identify with Lawrence, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He starts out as this wide-eyed, idealistic, because like you said, they talk about how he had an interest in the culture and the people, and that's why he more or less why he got sent there. And he's just like, oh, I'm excited to be, he's got this excitement to be around these Arab tribes and these people, and he's, they give him the robes to wear, and he's excited. He's like, prancing around and feeling pretty, oh so pretty.
That was all improvised.
I know, and I'm just like, it's like it's like a little kid playing dress up. He's enjoying himself, and then he turns around and there's somebody staring at him who's like, I'm gonna kill you because you're you're in my wells, you're on my property, or however that goes. And then he's got this idealized look at this culture, and then the more he gets into it, especially this is wartime as well. He's in the middle of a big conflict between all these tribes, and he's just stuck in the middle of it. And then he just sort of loses that idealism as it goes along. So like one article I read, it's like this is the sort of the opposite of the epic hero tale, where the epic hero is someone to be idolized, someone who accomplishes something great and is admired for it. This one, he just kind of loses his I don't want to say naivety, because it's not quite that, but his idealism, I guess.
Yeah.
About everything, because by the end he's going home and he just looks like he doesn't care anymore.
Yeah, it's the rise and fall of an individual.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sad because you do kind of, at the beginning he seems so confident and self-assured and knowledgeable in what he feels like is his field of speciality, but by the end he's like, yeah, I had no idea, and it's just kind of drained him, really, which is why I kind of classify this more as a war movie, because that's what happens in war, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, you through the modern lens now we can watch this portrayal of this guy, which Peter O'Toole did a great job, all things considering. But Lawrence starts out with this almost immature in a way, like when he gets called in to meet the general to get this assignment, and he salutes, and the general is all like, I can't tell if you're mocking me or not, and he's like, it's my nature, sir. It's just there were several moments where I'm like, dude, you're not taking this seriously. This is war. But yeah, he's got this kind of idealized that, it's like, oh, I finally get to go to Arabia and be in the desert, this place that I love so much because apparently sand is clean.
There is an overarching interesting thing there, though, because if you think about how like naive he's approaching the situation, just like wanting to enjoy it, you also can realize that in the grain of the broad history that's happening, society also has no idea what they're doing. They're just doing things.
Yeah.
Right. Idealistically.
Yeah, because by the time we're in the First World War, and the world, the planet had not seen a conflict like this. There's a reason it's called the Great War. But yeah, throughout the course of the film, even before you get to intermission, which this movie has an intermission. But even before you get to intermission, you see just he is becoming psychologically damaged, and by the end of the movie, it is very obvious that this man is suffering from PTSD, which they would not have had that label then. But that's exactly where he's coming out of this. He is psychologically broken. He has seen and experienced things that have fundamentally changed who he is as a person. So, and Peter O'Toole does a brilliant job of portraying that as best as they can, considering what we know about psychology now versus then. But he gets these looks in his eyes, and he his body trembles, and he just looks like he doesn't know whether to cry or to lash out at everybody or drink himself to death or what, just because he's just been to hell and back
in
this experience. So although Peter O'Toole was drunk for a good chunk of the movie, so how much of that played into it?
Well, he didn't have the greatest time filming the movie, if the reports are to be believed anyway.
Most of the cast did not have a very good time filming. The film, if you look at how this movie was made, it's amazing that it was made at all, because you've got David Lean, who at this point, is a somewhat established director. He'd done Bridge Over the River Kwai like 5 years previously. And then you've got Sam Spiegel as the producer. But apparently David Lean is like this really perfectionist director who has a very specific way of doing things. And then you've got Spiegel, who is just weird based on some of the stories that I've read, as a producer being, involved, because Lean insisted that they film as much of the movie as possible where it actually took place. So they went out to the desert. They go to Jordan and Morocco and all these places, and they're filming in some locations where the nearest source of water is like 150 miles away, and it's hotter than, blazes outside, and there's sandstorms, and it's just nuts. And because the way he would do shots, they were lucky if they got a shot a day. Some of these big sweeping shots of guys riding camels that would come across the screen. It's a beautiful shot, but if they realized that something was wrong with the shot and they had to do it again, they literally had to send teams of guys out into the sand wearing special covered shoes with palm fronds to sweep away the footprints so that they could shoot, so they could back the camels back up and have them walk by again on pristine sand.
Oh boy.
Which is why this movie took like almost a year to make. Just to shoot. It was like 200 and something days to shoot, because they were lucky if they got a shot a day. And David Lean hated the idea of having like a second unit. Like, if you've seen all the speaking of Lord of the Rings, if you've seen like the behind the scenes stuff from Lord of the Rings, like by the time they're getting to the Return of the King, they're doing like 3-4 units shooting, and other people are taking over direct. So Peter Jackson, because he can't be in 4 places at once, and that's how they were able to film it. But David Lean was like, no second units, I do everything. So that was it.
I've seen a lot of things that signal that there's like a massive attention to detail, even though it's such a vast effort, which is like definitely something to like be interested in and investigate more. Like, one of the things that like really stood out was the first scene on the motorcycle was that's actually a real 1924 Brough Superior, and that's actually what Peter O'Toole, not Peter O'Toole, T.E. Lawrence actually did die on, which was like his favorite motorcycle apparently.
Wow.
Like, if you see the motor, it says JAP. That's an homage to J.A. Prescott, who made the engine. And those are like incredibly rare motorcycles. Like, I have a couple friends that are into motorcycles, and that's in 1962 when they were making this movie. That was a vintage motorcycle then that would have cost, probably thousands of dollars to even get access to. So I don't know what else. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say, whereas in other movies they'd been like, well, we found this one, it found a different model, it was a little bit later, he wouldn't have ridden it at that time because it wasn't invented yet or it wasn't made yet, but it's close enough, we'll do that, which a lot of movies do. And that's really not a detail that people watching the movie would care about, but apparently the director did. And maybe that just kind of adds more to the realism, even though you don't realize it. that's what you're thinking, but maybe it's more of a psychological thing. And I don't know. Maybe I'm just spitballing here after the fact because as I'm watching this is like because I'm watching this and it is so much. Sorry, Jared's here. He's coughing. It's allergies. Don't worry. But it's like because I'm watching this, I'm like, yeah, I can. I realize that this is one of those movies that everybody says is amazing, and usually I'm kind of like, really, is it really that great? And I just kind of recognize. I mean, it's not something I would probably choose to watch again if I didn't have to, but I also recognize that it's something special. It's something, in and of itself, it is something special. It is something amazing and interesting and cool, but even though maybe the story isn't the most uplifting to talk about or to have viewed. So I think those kind of details, yes, he was probably a real what on set to everybody, to the cast and crew about his over perfectionism. But I think it adds something to the movie. Not that I'm saying that every director has to be that crazy about those kinds of things. I don't know if crazy is the right word, but it's the only one I can think of right now. But I kind of appreciate his efforts in that regard.
Yeah, it just signals like the tip of the iceberg. Like there's probably other things that we have no idea that are actually accurate that were really difficult to get on set. Like I guess Steven Spielberg did that too, right? It's like a lot of the Indiana Jones movies are filled with like old tech, like old hardware from World War I and II, and it's like he didn't really have to go that far, but he did anyway.
Yeah, and maybe that's just part of their style as a director, as directors, is they're going to be that detail oriented, that intense about it, and it works for them, and clearly it worked for the movie. I think. I don't know how anybody else feels.
Yeah.
It's something I can appreciate. If I were, I mean, I'm not a film director. I have no desire to be. That being said, I don't know if I would go that far to being that detail oriented about it. So I can kind of admire someone for being that obsessive about, not obsessive, but that committed. Let's say that committed to it.
I'm with you. I mean, there's like movies I've watched that, like Ford versus Ferrari recently, and I'm like, oh, I just love like that the GT40 was actually the real car, and like that sort of stuff. If you're into history movies, is much appreciated.
Very. I can definitely understand that.
Because all you're doing is trying to immerse yourself mentally in like what it was actually like as much as possible. A lot of times.
Yeah, because you look at these movies as a way to when I watch a movie that is a historical period piece, not something that but I'm watching so many years after the fact that was made in a modern capacity or modern time. I mean, I'll go back to the Future just because that's one of my easiest ones to do. And looking at all the the 1950s, I want to be immersed in that world, in that setting, in that place. I don't want to see something and be like, oh, was that car, was that building, was that jacket really something that would have been in the 1950s or in World War I era Middle East or something like that? Is that all true to form? And I don't want to be distracted by those things. I want to feel like I'm right there with them, which I'm sure a lot of people are like that when they go see movies, and they just want to just be there in the setting. So, and this movie, not to belabor the point, but it does it very well, and it's something I can appreciate.
Yeah,
Holly, Brittany, what do you guys think?
I liked it for the most part, and I mean the attention to detail, and I'm sure those camels are not a joy to work with.
Yeah, from everything I understand, riding a camel is nothing like riding a horse.
Yeah.
Fleas,
Like,
fleas everywhere.
It's a whole different technique.
I mean,
I rode one once, like at a zoo, for like it was like a little like circle thing, like you do like
Yeah, you're on it for a couple
carnivals.
of minutes. You're not on it for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, I couldn't
baking out in
imagine being on it.
baking out in the sun. Yeah, apparently, by the end of the film, the Peter O'Toole, like the inside of his legs were just like so chafed. No matter what he tried. Yeah, just he like bought like rubber padding to put underneath his butt, which helped some, and then word got out and other people wanted some rubber padding, so he became like a dealer for like rubber padding at one point. But even then it still only did so much. So
I mean, like like how they had the legs position looked tiring.
Yeah, well, the way, like the gait of a camel, like I've ridden horses. The gait of a camel is so different than the gait of a horse. If you've ever ridden horses for a long amount of time, you kind of get used to the way, they kind of, they trot, gallop, and sort of thing. Camels, it's kind of this more rolling motion. And I could, just watching it, I'd be like, man, my back would hurt so much after that. With a horse, it's more like your hips and butt and thighs that hurt. But yeah, with a camel, I don't think it's, you gotta do something way different.
Yeah.
And probably
that being
a little
said,
more
I didn't know
exhausting.
camels could go that fast.
Neither did I.
Yeah.
And one scene from Aladdin with the genie's warning: "Be careful, they spit."
Yeah.
that just can't pop.
There are several scenes where the camels, which these camels that they were using were all trained. They're all trained for movies. So there are wild camels in that part of the world that you could see, but these were all trained. But there are a couple of scenes where the camels kind of steal the scene, like when they get to the last place that they're going to be able to stop for water before crossing this big expanse of desert. And Omar Sharif's character is telling Lawrence that, at this point, no water. What we have is what we've got. It's got to last for us and the camels. And he's like, in 20 days without water, the camels will die. And the camel just like turns its head and goes, huh? Like, what? What do you mean dead in 20 days? And then when Lawrence is when he and his two helpers go, because he knows he needs to take the message to the British troops, and the one boy comes across the quicksand, and of course it's all stunt and everything, but like he gets into the quicksand and he realizes it's quicksand, but then the camel is like, oh, quicksand, hell no, and turns around and like hauls ass out of it. I was like, the camels know what's up. Which I thought those were funny. So I don't know if I want to ride a camel, but they seem like they have interesting personalities. Speaking of the camels and the production of this, not only did Lean obviously put everything he had into it as the director, but a lot of the cast literally put their blood, sweat, and tears into this movie. Mostly Peter O'Toole being the star. Over the course of filming this movie, O'Toole got almost died when his camel panicked and threw him off.
Ooh.
Yeah. It wasn't so much it was part of the camel throwing him off, but then where he got threw off, it threw him right in front of a bunch of horses.
Oh.
So, yeah, he almost got
Even
trampled
worse.
by a bunch of horses, but actually the camel was trained that once it threw him off, it actually went and stood over him to stop him from being trampled. So it's like,
Ugh.
good thing these camels are trained.
Well, and camels, I think, are a lot taller than horses, so you fall from that distance.
Yeah.
That's not fun. I mean, I've fallen off a horse before. It's not fun at all.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. Let's see, where else? I got a whole list of like all of his injuries. Let's see. He received 3rd-degree burns, sprayed both his ankles, tore ligaments in both his hip and thigh, broke his thumb, dislocated his spine, fractured his skull, was bitten by a camel, sprained his neck, tore groin muscle, and was concussed twice. He also injured his hand by punching through a window of a caravan while drunk. Don't do things when you're drunk, people. And then when they were filming the motorcycle scene at the very beginning of the movie, if you've ever seen filming, you know that usually like the person sits on the bike is attached to a trailer, and the camera's in that trailer, so that you're not actually like driving the bike, it's being pulled. But when they were doing that, the bar that connected the bike and its trailer to the truck that the camera was on snapped, and if it hadn't been for a piece of rope, O'Toole would have been flying on that motorcycle. So thankfully he was not hurt, but he did say afterwards, I think it was only Lawrence up there teasing.
Oh gosh.
Because that's how Lawrence actually died. On motorcycle.
Okay, I'm gonna say this because one thing, because you know this movie was nominated for a boatload of Oscar nominations, but it did not win any acting awards. Peter O'Toole was beaten out by Gregory Peck, who was playing Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird that year. To Kill a Mockingbird is one of my favorite movies ever. Gregory Peck is amazing in that movie. That being said, after hearing what Peter O'Toole had to go through, I kind of feel bad that he didn't win.
He should have gotten sympathy Oscar.
Yeah.
It's like you should have gotten the award just to say sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't even get that was Alec Guinness until like the end of the film. I was like, oh, there he is. I was like, I knew he was in this movie somewhere.
Well, apparently they said that he looks so much like the real Prince Faisal that even people who knew Prince Faisal had a hard time telling that it was somebody else.
Yeah, the people that actually knew their old Faisal are like, dude, you really look like him.
Been funny if Alec Guinness was like, really?
Yeah. And the thing was Guinness actually wanted to play Lawrence in this movie because he had played him in a stage production called Ross. But they decided he was too old. And actually Laurence Olivier had been offered the role of Faisal, and then when he turned it down, Guinness was offered the part. And there are conflicting reports on whether O'Toole was the first choice for the part. Some say that he was, some others say that he wasn't. Supposedly Marlon Brando had been offered the part and turned it down because he had worked with Spiegel. Spiegel had produced On the Waterfront in 1954. But supposedly Brando said he didn't want to spend 2 years of his life riding on a camel. And then the role was offered to Albert Finney, and they went as far as putting Finney through screen tests, costing like 100,000 pounds sterling, which I don't know what that equates to now. But he refused to sign a 7-year contract because at that time they were still, movie studios were still signing actors to like these super long contracts, and Finney was like, no. But O'Toole was like, I'll sign it. And He got the role. Even a lot of it was the fact that he looks a lot like the real Lawrence, even though he's a lot taller than the real Lawrence. So this is something that was brought up a lot during production, and then for years after. The real Lawrence was 5'5", and Peter O'Toole 6'2".
Yes. What about his height, Peter? He was a very short man, and you're a very tall man. Do you make any effort as an actor to think like a small man?
No. I've always said when anyone asks me about Lawrence's inches, I always say it's a question for his tailor, not his interpreter, and that's probably a bit flip. But there's nothing I can do. I don't think it's really all that important anyway. And I'm certainly sure he never thought as a small man.
Yeah.
And I happen to be 8'5", as you clearly implied.
Yes.
And I can't chop off my legs and roam around on bloody stumps, so I really have had to disregard.
But
Peter
O'Toole is just like, yeah. For the most part, it didn't matter, except for the scenes where he was in the same shot as Claude Rains, because Claude Rains was so much shorter than him. So if you see, there's a scene of them like walking down a hallway, I think, and you can see he's kind of like, he's got his hands like behind his back or something, like clasped together, and you can see he's kind of leaning a little bit, and that's because in certain shots, like if they put Claude Rains all in the frame, like his head would be cut off. But if they put Peter O'Toole in made sure he was in the entire frame, then it cut off Claude Rains in like a weird spot. So they had to get kind of creative with some of the shots. So because Peter O'Toole was so tall. What else is like stands out, like as far as like the film itself as a whole? I know, Chauncey, as you were watching it at one point, you're like, oh yeah, this is pretty good. Then by the time you got to the end, you're like, it wasn't that good. So what was it that you did enjoy?
It reminds me of like my reaction to the first time I saw Blade Runner, because I love Blade Runner now, but the first time I watched it, I was like, this is awful. And then I recently had that experience with Ad Astra as well. I was like, this is terrible. And then like later after I think about it, I'm like, oh, that was awesome. And it really is like that type of movie. It's like a film studies movie where like I gotta sit and think. And that's sort of what's annoying to me, because like, you know, I had plans this week. I didn't really want to think about Lawrence of Arabia. No, I'm kidding. I'll get over myself. But the point here is, you know, like life is stranger than fiction, and that's what they did. They told a story about real life, and that's sometimes not as enjoyable as, you know, fiction, but that's okay.
Yeah. Well, first off, I agree with you about Blade Runner, because I watched that and I'm like, oh man, this is kind of a dumb movie. But maybe I just need to watch it again and think about it some more. But on the other hand, going back to Lawrence, like I said, I like when I'm in the mood for sort of just an old-timey classic film. Like I'll compare it to this. My grandma loved Gone with the Wind. It was her favorite movie ever. And when I was growing up, sometimes I would, she'd be watching it and I'd catch bits and pieces of it. It wasn't till after she'd passed away that I got the chance to sit down and just watch it and be like, why did my grandma love this movie so much? First time I watched it, I hated the stupid movie. I thought Scarlett O'Hara was the worst person ever. And just why did my grandma love this movie so much? And so but then I thought about it, and I've seen it a couple more times since then. I can kind of more appreciate it, and the sort of like the filmmaking technique, the storytelling techniques of that era. And I know, Lawrence of Arabia is well after that time, but I think maybe it reminded me of that experience of first time I watched Gone with the Wind, I hated it. But now I can kind of appreciate it. So maybe it was just sort of that mentality of mine as like, yeah, it's not something I would pick up on my own. It's not something I would watch more than once if I didn't have to, but I can just, I kind of have that different point of view as this isn't necessarily something that I watch to be entertained. It's more for the experience of it. So it's one of those. So I'm gonna call it. It goes in my Gone with the Wind file. It's a great movie for all of its techniques and acting and all those kinds of things. It's not something that you watch to turn your brain off.
Yeah, so like I teach my students about in professional development in this innovation class I'm in about this concept of your circle of influence and then your circle of concern, and like everything that you can do within your circle of influence is really just the things you actually have tangible control over, and everything within the circle of concern is just stuff you think about, and that's not really stuff you have abilities to change. And this is a story of like what I teach, which is like the more you sort of engage sort of with integrity what you can do in your circle of influence, people tend to trust you more and more, and your circle of influence grows. And that's just like a life lesson in professional spheres. So like Lawrence of Arabia is like a big demonstration of that. It's like he appreciated the culture of Arabia, and it's like all the tribes and all the religious perspectives, and he took all that in stride, and then he saw the big overall problem, which was a circle of concern, and then he just slowly within his abilities of influence just made inroads, and people started to trust him, and he built a name for himself. But that is the rise, and then we've seen the fall, which is the fact that it kind of got out of control ahead of him. So he's just like, I'm done with this. It's like, and I'm sure there are lots of people in real life that you go through this as an arc of your own personal story. It's like you build up some sort of career as a certain type of person, and you do as best you can, and then at some point you don't have full control almost at any time, but at some point it's so big that like if no one has full control, it just crumbles. It's a house of cards, just falls back down. And that's sort of what this movie shows. So that's kind of the direction I'm thinking as far as like how I will kind of ponder this movie moving forward, is sort of that angle. And that's what will make me like this movie more. So just relating to it. That's all.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of like another example. Like I liked Ad Astra because it was similar to Moby Dick, and that I know not everyone knows the story of Ad Astra, but it's Moby Dick. It's a pretty ubiquitous story, and it's like you have some crazy visionary, and Lawrence of Arabia is very similar. It's like you have some crazy visionary who is maybe naive, maybe just actually crazy, and is pushing everyone around them, and slowly grows their influence to the point where everyone trusts them, and sort of pushes society and pushes the actions of everything in a certain direction within their control. And then at some point catastrophe happens, and we have to kind of reel it back in. But in the process of all this, a lot of good and bad things happen, and the summation of it usually is some sort of epic tale. But so like for instance in Moby Dick, it's the white whale causes the visionary to make civilization much more of an ocean faring civilization. And then like in Ad Astra, it's making civilization much more of a space faring civilization. And then here in this, it's like, oh, now there's like this concept of governance in Arabia with all these tribes, but it still didn't quite work.
Yeah. Although it definitely seemed to increase the interest of in Middle Eastern cultures for the British, because it's after this point, historically speaking, that they really got interested in ancient Egyptian, like the mummies and stuff like that. That's why the Mummy takes place when it does.
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of Indiana Jones sort of imagery, so I can see why Steven Spielberg sort of borrowed a lot of that.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of Indiana Jones, and the score makes me think of Indiana Jones quite a bit.
Yeah.
Which, a lot like the casting of them, trying to cast their Lawrence and going from person to person to person to get the score done. They went from person to person to person to person, and finally Maurice Jarre got hired. By the time he got hired to do the score, he had 6 weeks to write the score.
6 weeks.
Yes.
Wow.
To score
Well,
that movie.
Yeah.
Talk about performance under pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Considering at one point they were looking at hiring Richard Rodgers to do the score, which, if you know any of the show tunes that Rodgers is well known for, you're like, this would have been a completely different movie.
Yeah, sounds like it.
So I'm glad that they decided to pass. Like, you go back to winning Tony Awards there, Mr. Rogers, and we're going to hire this guy.
Well, he did a great job, so.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of that, the score is just, people will, you could probably play it for people and be like, oh, yeah, I recognize that, even if they have no idea what it's from. Just some of the pieces of it are just very iconic and stuff that you've probably heard elsewhere without realizing its origin. Yeah. So it's just why it won an Oscar for original score. Yeah, it was nominated for 10 Oscars. It would have been nominated for 11, but their costume designer was not nominated because they forgot to submit her.
Oh my God.
Oops.
Yeah.
Somebody fell asleep on the job.
Yeah.
I mean, whether she would have won, who knows? But
who won that year?
I don't know. Let's see. That's the 35th Academy Awards. Let's see how. According to the interwebs, best costume design color, because they differentiated then.
Well,
best costume design color went to The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm.
And
I don't think I've seen that.
Yeah, I'm like, has anybody heard of that movie?
Yeah, the other nominees were Bon Voyage, Gypsy, My Geisha, and The Music Man, which is one of my favorite musical movies.
Oh, Music Man.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, all those others, never heard of them.
Well, it's Gypsy, if you know your musicals. But yeah, so yeah, but it did win 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 of the 10 it was nominated for. So, but yeah, neither of the actors, because Peter O'Toole got nominated for Best Actor, Omar Sharif got nominated for Best Supporting Actor, and then got nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, and it did not win that. But it won Best Picture, Director, Original Score, Cinematography, which I think that's well deserved. Art Direction, I think that's well deserved too. Editing, and Sound.
So all the technical stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think it totally deserves those.
Oh well, yeah. I'm not saying it didn't. It's just kind of funny to me. Nowadays the technical stuff goes to things like, comic book movies and popular things, whereas this one got the technical awards, but also won Best Picture. I don't know that would happen these days. Maybe it would. I don't know, but
yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was any matte paintings in the movie. Like, there are a couple shots that are like gorgeous, and I'm like, wow, that's amazing. That's a real place.
The only thing that was built on a soundstage, as far as sets, was the was it supposed to be like St. Paul's Cathedral or something for Lawrence's funeral?
Oh yeah.
That's like the only thing that was built on a sound stage. Everything else, any other sets were built out in the actual real world.
Okay,
in the desert. So
I'm going to make a comment. It would probably be a little easier for them to get access to St. Paul's Cathedral than it would be to get to any of these other places that they filmed.
Yeah.
And that one's the set.
And not have water be 150 miles away.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. You would think, but Lean wanted it to be accurate as possible.
Okay.
And the thing was, like there were some places he wanted to film that he never did because logistically they could not get to. Like he wanted to film at Petra. Everybody knows Petra at the very least from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Is where they go to enter to find the Holy Grail. That is Petra. But at the time, the pathway to get to Petra was like a camel. You could get like a camel through. So the time it would take to get them through one at a time was never gonna happen. So
not happening.
Yeah. But yeah, they filmed, a lot of it was in the Middle East, but like I said, they also filmed in Morocco. They filmed in Spain. The town of Aqaba was actually recreated on a dried riverbed in southern Spain. So they even managed to find some desert-like areas in the UK for very, very specific things.
Not a rock quarry?
Not a rock quarry. Not a rock quarry. Actually, this is a year before Doctor Who comes. Before we get Doctor Who, so.
Yep.
They hadn't realized the joy that is filming in British rock quarries yet. So.
Nope.
I probably one of the most iconic shots is the when Omar Sharif's character first appears from the distance, and it has like this mirage-like look to it. They actually use, you mentioned Panavision, Chauncey, like literally that was Panavision. It was a 482 millimeter lens.
Wow.
Yes. It was used for that shot and has not been used ever since. Panavision still has it, but nobody's used it.
Wow. I mean, just so you know, 482 millimeters is actually almost 19 inches.
Wow.
It's over a foot.
Yeah. It is a long lens.
That's a lot of I don't know, like how big the film itself was. Like IMAX film is pretty big, but I don't know. Maybe that was a bigger thing. I don't know.
Well, can you just imagine how often you would have to change the thing?
Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when they went to do it was 35 millimeter film.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because there's an incident that's kind of an urban legend. Is supposedly the 35 millimeter master that was produced by Technicolor in '66 flipped a reel so that left to right became reversed on screen for about 10 minutes.
Ooh.
And it stayed that way, going into initial home video release and some TV broadcasts. But because there's no writing, nobody spotted it. It wasn't until they did the restoration that they realized they found the error and then fixed it. So, because if you watch an early enough version, the only way you could really tell is that Lawrence's watch switches wrists. Oh, but when they went to do the restoration in the 80s, the restorers that when they got permission from Columbia Pictures to restore it, the two conversations, conservationalists, I'll get it. Robert Harris and Jim Painter, they sent them the extraneous footage. It was 4 tons. And it took them a year to go through it all.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. Because there was a lot of unused footage because Lean was such a perfectionist.
Wow, how'd you like to get that extended DVD? Well, Blu-ray, I guess, by now, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah. So I guess talking about influence, both Lawrence's influence, but then this movie's influence, since it was released over 50 years ago, can still be seen, obviously, as we're talking about. You can see those influences and hear those influences in movies like Indiana Jones and Star Wars and Mad Max and things like that. But the film itself is one of those that is really, in the cultural zeitgeist, as it were. It is in the 97 AFI top 100 movies of all time list. It was number 5. It fell to number 7 in the 2007 updated list. It is on the British Film Institute's list of greatest movies of all time at number 3. And in 2004, it was voted the best British film of all time in a Sunday Telegraph poll of Britain's leading filmmakers. And, it's been parodied and referenced all over the place. Actually, I think one of the first times I ever heard the title Lawrence of Arabia is actually in a episode of Are You Being Served, where the staff have to come up with they want to drum up more sales at the department store they work at, so they get the idea of doing like a radio play. So the staff are commissioned to come up with a story and pitch it, and Captain Peacock essentially plagiarizes Lawrence of Arabia and calls it Peacock of Arabia.
Well, now we come to Captain Peacock, and as one might expect, he's given us an erudite story of army life.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I'm confident that one can feel the heat and the flies, one can smell the bazaars, one can share the agony and ecstasy of the hero's remarkable story of the way he changed the course of world history.
It's a brilliant piece of writing.
Thank you, my dear.
But as Miss Belfridge pointed out, merely copying T.E. Lawrence verbatim is not quite what we wanted.
Well, I did make certain changes.
Peacock of Arabia was not quite enough.
That's one of the first times I ever heard the name Lawrence of Arabia. And then, of course, it is mentioned in the Billy Joel song, We Didn't Start the Fire.
Which is the first time I've heard of it.
Yeah, me too. In fact, when we found out that this was what we were watching for our forfeit, I started singing Lawrence of Arabia, British Beatlemania. Yeah, that whole list, because We Didn't Start the Fire is one of those songs I'm like, when I hear just even one part of it or a name or something that is from that song, I have to start humming it from that point. So I've been humming that song pretty much for a week almost.
Yeah. And I don't think I don't know if it's necessarily directly influenced by this in any form or fashion, but the entire time watching this movie, they talk about the Turks. All I could think about is that song that they might be giants about Istanbul.
Istanbul was Constantinople, now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. Been a long time gone, Constantinople, now it's Turkish delight on a moonlit night. Every gal in Constantinople lives in Istanbul, not Constantinople. So if you've a date in Constantinople, she'll be waiting in Istanbul. Even old New York was once New Amsterdam. Why they changed it, I can't say. People just liked it better that way. So take me back to Constantinople. No, you can't go back to Constantinople. Been a long time gone, Constantinople. Why did Constantinople get the works? That's nobody's business but the Turks.
Istanbul, Constantinople, Istanbul. Yeah.
It's pop culture just feeds on itself over and over and over again.
Yeah, there's in my YouTube recommendations, because of course I have to dive into everything and do my research like I do. So in the process of me watching, interviews with Peter O'Toole and Spielberg and all these people, one of the recommended videos that I got was this music video for this, like, I don't know what they call themselves, like folk heavy metal, I guess. I think they're from like Norway or something, but they're like heavier than Metallica because they're a bit more screamy, but they're not like screamy the entire time screamy. But they have this song called Seven Pillars of Wisdom, which is the title of T.E. Lawrence's book. And so their song is heavily influenced by Lawrence of Arabia. There's like lines from the movie and lines from Lawrence's book in the lyrics and the video is this guy dressed as Peter O'Toole's Lawrence riding a camel. So while they like perform their song in like the ruins of Aqaba or something. So I will put a link to that in the show notes as well. So it's like I don't understand most of what they're saying, but every now and then I'll hear something and I'm like, I recognize that.
Like, I remember that thing.
Yeah. So it's got long running influence throughout popular culture, and I don't think it's gonna go anywhere anytime soon. So, and they've after listening to our review, if you want, they've already covered this on Unspooled. So you can go and listen to their episode talking about Lawrence of Arabia as well, and whether they think it belongs on the list of 100 greatest movies of all time, and does it belong at number 7, which I can see it being on the list. I don't know if it deserves to be at number 7. That's just me. But
it definitely, in my opinion, and that is just my opinion, I do think it deserves to be on the list. Ranking it is another matter entirely. But I don't know. I think even just for its influence and what it inspired going forward, and will probably continue to inspire as time goes on.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I mean,
yeah.
I think whether or not you agree with the story or what the message or what it's trying to convey, you could debate that all you want. But as far as the movie, the techniques used, the way that it filmed, and even the director David Lean's obsession with the attention to detail, it inspired guys like Steven Spielberg in their work, and everyone knows who he is, and everyone has been impacted by his movies in one way or another. So take that for what it's worth. But it's Yeah, it's a movie I enjoyed. I don't know if I'll ever watch it again, but I'm glad I'm not. Well, I'm glad I watched it, and it kind
Nice.
of
So you did.
yeah.
Can
Yeah.
check that off.
Yep. And I kind of feel like, you know what? Maybe I want to see if I can find some other old-timey classic movies kind of in that same vein. So maybe, well, I can't right now because the library's closed.
Yeah.
So I can't get DVDs. Well, I could because I work there, but anyway, I'm not gonna go down that road. But yeah, it's like, maybe I'll check some more of these the the AFI list. I'm not really that into it, but every once in a while I kind of get the itch to watch something like that. So we'll see. Anyone else? What like Brittany and Holly? What do you guys?
I
Parting
like,
thoughts.
the same way. It's like like I don't think I'm gonna be watching it again anytime soon. Not for a few reasons. But it's like I'm glad to finally have seen it. Like it's definitely been on that. I should watch this. It's been on so many lists of like. So I'm glad I got the experience. I had an excuse to finally watch it, I guess.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat with Britt. It's just, yeah. If I had my, if I had my choice between Lawrence of Arabia and another movie, I would probably have gone with the other movie. But hey, it was enjoyable for what it was worth.
It was an illuminating experience, educational at the very least.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Do I want to watch it again? No.
Yeah, I'm curious to know, like in 1962, like if it brought a tone to the cinema going experience that like hadn't been there before. Like, because we're so spoiled now with movies that cover everything, and it's like I wonder if in '62 this just seemed like it was another planet for most Western people watching movies. Because that right there might explain why it's such a classic in terms of what people say, because maybe it really did bring in some sort of like, this like new tone of like, oh wow, there's really adventure still out there and all this. I don't know. Maybe that's why my assumption is.
Oh, I kind of think about it in these terms because 1962 is the year my dad was born. Growing up, my dad watched a lot of Westerns, was kind of his big thing. And a lot of people's big thing. Those were really popular. And then you get movies like Star Wars, and that just kind of opens up this whole big, oh my gosh, this is something new and exciting and expansive. And it's like, we didn't know we could make movies like this. And so maybe it's kind of in that same way, you're not going to space, but you're going to a different part of the world that maybe we haven't been able to go film there, or nobody's thought of it, or I mean, as hard as it was for them to film Lawrence of Arabia there in the first place. And then also realize, because Rachel kind of mentioned it a little bit just a minute ago when she was talking about the Oscar nominations in the costume design, they had to differentiate between color and black and white. So this is still in a time period when, I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird came out around this same time, and that's all in black and white, and that's regarded as one of the great classic films as well. So to get so movies that were in color are still kind of, at this point, are still kind of a novelty. It's still kind of something like, oh wow, this is cool. And to say nothing, there's TV, but it's all in black and white. So you go to the movies and you see something on screen in color like that, it's still, that's a new technology that's still blowing people's minds at the time, and rightfully so. So
a
that's something to
watershed.
consider. Yeah. It's definitely watershed, like you said.
I mean, at the end of the day, did I like it? Not really. Will I watch it again? No, but I could definitely appreciate it for what it is and the influence it has, because because it did influence creators like Spielberg and George Lucas and the others, and without someone like David Lean doing this epic production, filming on location with, such a long film with these, incredible shots that nobody had ever seen before. and all these different techniques and everything. It's like, without that influence, then we would not have some of the movies that we all love today, like Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I got to tip my hat to this because I have, Lord of the Rings, which is
So even if you never see Lawrence of Arabia, or if us talking about it inspired you to maybe go watch it, and then go watch Lord of the Rings and feel appreciation for Peter Jackson being able to stand up upon the shoulders of the giants who went before.
Yep.
As tried and cliche as that sounds, it definitely applies here.
Yep.
So
No, I mean, in the grand scheme of history, you are absolutely right. I mean, that's really a legacy, right?
Yeah. So I'm just, personally, I'm just going to say thanks to the Spark of Madness guys for quote unquote inflicting this on us, because honestly, I had a good time with it for what it's worth.
Just remember, we'll remember next year.
You guys can
forget
thank
this.
them, but not me. I'm going to put them into headlocks.
So anyway.
Well, if I roll my eyes any harder when saying thank you, they're gonna get stuck.
I'm kind of taking my victory there. It's like, yeah, you guys thought you were punishing me, putting me through something awful. No, I actually liked it. But that's me. You guys don't have to agree with me. It's okay.
Yep.
But anyway, well, if any of our listeners if you've seen Lawrence of Arabia, whether it was by choice or because you were assigned to do so by somebody and you had thoughts on it, or any other insight you may want to share, you can send us feedback. Our email address is 5ishfangirls@gmail.com. And also, I'm going to stress this week. I know it kind of got lost in all the global insanity going on, but we had some issues with some of our links getting posted to Facebook. So I'm just going to stress this: the best way to find us and to find our contact information, or just to find our content, is going straight to our website, which is the5ishfangirls.com. And I think after that little debacle, I think we might want to start trying to post more to our website. But anyway, that's where you can get our episodes. You can get our links to our different places, to the aforementioned social media, as much as I don't want to after that. But you can leave comments there. You can leave comments on our social media pages. You can support the podcast through our Patreon, through our Amazon store, through our merchandise shop. We also, wherever you listen to podcasts, we'll be there. Apple Podcasts, Google, and all those other great places. So look out for us. We're going to be here through all the ensuing craziness that's coming up. So,
if you go to order toilet paper off of Amazon, think of us.
Yeah, click on our link first, and you'll find toilet paper or baby wipes or whatever it is you're looking for.
This is a great time for those of you out there who aren't caught up on the Five-ish Fangirls to download the back episodes. I need to do such a thing.
Yes. If all you've got to do is sit around and play solitaire forever, you got to be listening to something. You might as well be listening to us. And maybe it'll distract you from all the things that are not happening right now. I mean, I don't want to say it's fear of missing out, because there's nothing going on for you to miss out on. So, but we all do need a distraction, and we're all here for you. So keep your chins up, and things will be back to normal before we know it, I hope.
Yep.
Yes, sir, Bob. All right. Well, with that and all this sand, I'm so with Anakin Skywalker with my opinion of sand.
Sand, it gets everywhere. Get used to it.
My notes as I was watching the movie, I mentioned sand multiple times in my notes.
After this, you need to go watch Frozen just for a palate cleanser.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched Frozen 2 the other day. I'm like, oh, yay, no sand. But with that, we're going to take our camels and run and sign off for this week.
This is Brittany and Bethlehem saying goodnight.
This is Chrissy saying goodnight from Salt Lake City.
This is Holly from Wisconsin saying good evening.
And this is Rachel and Chauncey in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I meant to mention this earlier when Chrissy, when you were talking about Peter O'Toole and how he's such a good-looking man, even if he's not your type, which he's not mine either. But apparently at the premiere, Noel Coward said that if he had been any prettier, they'd have had to call it Florence of Arabia.
Well, good night, Florence.
I really wish they would have had sand people and banthas in this movie.
You know, now I need a cut. I need a cut with the sand crawler coming over the hill or something.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if we looked, we find something. Someone would have to have done it.
Oh yeah.
And then,
Do the YouTube.
And then that yeah. And
Where?
Far from home, a man with a mission. In the heat of the glistening sun, in the heart of ancient tradition, this man's journey has only begun. Lead the charge, a raider has entered the battlefield. Sabotage, the game is about to unfold. As the darkness
You have been listening to the Five-ish Fangirls podcast. You can find more episodes and information at thefivishfangirls.com. Any and all books, movies, games, and any other forms of media mentioned are owned and operated by the respective copyright holders. No copyright infringement is intended or implied. If you wish to support the show, the easiest way is to leave us a rating and review. More ratings and reviews will make it easier for others to find the show. If you wish to support us monetarily, you can do so at patreon.com/5ishfangirlspodcast. All money goes towards fees and equipment to keep the show going. For official Five-ish Fangirls merchandise, visit redbubble.com/people/5ishfangirls. We love hearing from our listeners and encourage feedback. You can email us at fiveishfangirls@gmail.com. You can also like and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/5ishfangirls. Thank you so much for listening, and may the squee be with you.
who stood to gain, who stood to lose, who did the dying, betrayal and trust from within, or compelled, the pillars of wisdom can tell, back home where a new life awaits, whispers are past, the sands of Arabia calling. As the darkness falls and Arabia calls, on the spreads his wings as the battle begins. May the land lay claim unto Lawrence name, seven pillars of wisdom lights the flame. As the darkness falls and Arabia calls, on the spreads his wings as the battle begins. May the land lay claim unto Lawrence name, seven pillars of wisdom lights the flame.